2 Kings 5, verses 1 to 14, and I'm reading from the New Century Version, and it's entitled, Naaman is Healed. Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was honoured by his master, and he had much respect because the Lord used him to give victory to Aram. He was a mighty and a brave man, but he had a skin disease. The Arameans had gone out to steal from the Israelites and had taken a little girl as a captive. This little girl served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish my master would meet the prophet who lives in Samaria. He would cure him of his disease." Naaman went to the king and told him what the girl from Israel had said. The king of Aram said, "Go ahead, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left and took with him about 30,000 pieces of silver, as well as 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, "I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so you can heal him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes to show how upset he was. He said, "I'm not God. I can't kill and make alive again. Why does this man send someone with a skin disease to me to heal? You can see that the king of Aram is trying to start trouble with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent the king this message: "Why have you torn your clothes? Let Naaman come to me, then he will know there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots to Elisha's house and stood outside the door. Elisha sent Naaman a messenger who said, "Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Then your skin will be healed and you will be clean." Naaman became angry and left. He said, "I thought Elisha would surely come out and stand before me and call on the name of the Lord, his God. I thought he would wave his hand over the place and heal the disease." The Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, are better than all the waters of Israel. Why can't I wash in them and become clean? So Naaman went away very angry. Naaman's servants came near and said to him, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? Doesn't it make more sense just to do it? After all, he only told you, 'Wash, and you will be clean.'" So Naaman went down and dipped in the Jordan 7 times, just as Elisha had said. Then his skin became new again, like the skin of a child, and he was clean.
So long, long ago, when I was a little girl, there was a family who used to come and visit us, and we used to go and visit them. Our dads worked together, and their 2 boys were the same ages as me and my little sister. And the little boy, who was the same age as my sister, was called Bobby. And the thing that I remember about him was that he had the most horrendous eczema. He had it all over him, and when it got to the bottom of his feet and he couldn't run about, he used to sit and cry. And it was on his hair and his scalp, and on his face and his arms and everywhere. And I remember that sometimes during these visits he used to have to be taken upstairs and have his hair washed in cool water just to calm everything down. So it was really quite a debilitating thing. I don't know whether children suffer from it that badly now. I've not encountered it in that extreme form since those days. But I remember that sometimes other children were a bit frightened of him because he always looked a bit red and flaky. And if we went to the park and he went on a swing or something, sometimes other children wouldn't go on it after him because they thought it was dirty. Don't know where Bobby is now. He'll be in his 50s, won't he? I wonder what he's doing. But I always think of him when I read this story of Naaman in the Bible. I think that for him and for other people who had leprosy, their experiences might have been similar perhaps to Bobby to some extent. Leprosy was something to be feared, and people with leprosy were to be avoided if you didn't want to be contaminated by it. Nowadays, thankfully, leprosy is rare and treatable. Now, we don't know exactly what this disease was, because the thing that was called leprosy in Old Testament days wasn't always the same that's been called leprosy since. But nonetheless, being a bit of a nerd, I felt I must look up the symptoms of leprosy before I proceeded with writing the sermon. So here are the symptoms of leprosy. Skin patches and lesions, numbness of various parts of the body, wounds and burns appearing on the hands and feet, muscle weakness, and if left untreated, it leads to disfigurement. So in those days, and presumably any time since, if you had leprosy, you were an outcast. People feared leprosy and those with it like they feared AIDS when we first started to hear about that. Do you remember how frightening that was when those adverts used to come on the television with that coffin and it used to say AIDS, don't die of ignorance, didn't it? And I can remember as a very young person feeling really scared of those pictures and thinking, what is this thing? And of course, in those days, they believed that diseases were a punishment from God as well. So that was an added layer of fear and shame that went with the leprosy. Of course, it's not all that long ago, is it, that we feared people and disease. When the pandemic started, it was frightening to be near people, wasn't it? Because we didn't know where all this thing was coming from and how we were going to get it. I can remember being on a London bus and people arguing about hand sanitizer and people getting on with their arms folded, refusing to touch anything before they sat down. And one lady fell flat on her face in the bus aisle because she didn't touch anything. And I think we've all felt a little bit uneasy, haven't we, getting back to normal. We're not normal now, but you know what I mean, getting back to normal. And so perhaps with this recent experience, we can relate a little bit to the situation that Naaman found himself in. And I think the story brings up a number of issues. The first thing to note in the Bible story is that it's actually a child who has the solution to Naaman's problem. And that's what we're going to be thinking about in the 10:30 service. The next thing I think that comes out of this story is that sometimes we just need to listen to God, and the solution to our problem might be a lot easier than we thought. Naaman had got himself all geared up, hadn't he, to go and meet the man of God and have some miracle performed on him. He expected, a magic wand or something, I don't know. And he was simply told by a messenger to go and wash himself 7 times in the Jordan and he would be clean, which he refused to do because it wasn't dramatic enough. Sometimes we don't believe that the answer to our problems can be simple, because sometimes we're overwhelmed by the difficulties that we face. But what we find is that if we share them with one another and listen to God, we begin to discover what God wants for us. And in the simplicity of those relationships and conversations, we may begin to find the help that we need. And there's also something, I think, in the story about being inclusive and fostering good relationships. Naaman is an outsider in more ways than one. It's not just that he has leprosy, it's also that he's not a member of the House of Israel and he's from a foreign army. And initially, his request for help causes a bit of controversy. I do like a bit of clothes rending, don't you? In the Old Testament, there's always a good bit of fun. But it turns out that the foreigner, the outsider, is worthy of God's help. and the community's support. So there's a lesson there too, I think, about the welcoming of outsiders and a reminder that everyone is within the scope of God's love and everyone can be healed by God.